Welcome to another episode of Stately Investing with your host, Burnett King. If you like the content I'm putting out there, give us a thumbs up. If you love the content I'm putting out there, give us a subscribe. It really helps the channel. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section or send me an email at statelyinvesting@gmail.com. And let's get started with the show. All right, everybody, let's start off today's episode with a look at the passive income portfolio and see how it's doing in light of coronavirus. Obviously, you see we're down here. My return is quite down over all time. We're down about 25%. My value is sitting right around 10,000. You can see I put in 12,000, a little over 12,000 in net cash, and market gain has gone down by around 2,000. Overall, that gain has been mitigated a little bit, right? So this difference between 2,000 and 1,900 is the earned dividends of $137. So coronavirus is obviously having a big impact on the market. Things are just down globally. The longer coronavirus lingers on, the more we'll see this negative returns for folks. The Fed just cut its interest rate. So I'm recording this on March 16th of 2020. And the U.S. Fed just cut the interest rates to 0, hoping that would stimulate the economy. And it didn't seem to work today. The markets dropped pretty significantly. We're still midday here, so things may turn around. But overall, coronavirus is having a big impact on the markets and people's confidence in the markets. And so I think this trend will probably continue for the next few weeks, at least in the U.S. We'll see if it drops even further or if things change, how they'll change based off of policy and just overall people's confidence as we enter the longer term phases of this pandemic, and will things turn around. This is not the focus of today's episode, however, right? So we're not going to focus on my passive income portfolio. Today's focus is going to be on my holdings. So let's jump over to the holdings tab, and you can see by value what my holdings look like. And you can see a lot of red, right? So these things were green just 2 weeks ago. And as coronavirus took hold, my holdings continued to drop. But the idea is that we would start this new series on analyzing each one of the companies in my holdings. And so I wanted to start with the top. So what companies are my highest value? Well, this has changed over the past couple of weeks, but today it's Verizon Communications. And so I think we're going to jump into Verizon, and I will walk you guys through how you can research these companies and decide whether or not to add them to your portfolio, decide whether or not to keep them in your portfolio, and just generally know more about the companies that you're invested in. I think, having knowledge in the companies that you're invested in is key to making sure you're making the right decisions when you decide to add or sell things. And so let's jump in. But before that, I just want to encourage everybody to subscribe, give me some likes if you're enjoying the content, and, stay tuned. Hopefully this will be an ongoing thing. So I'll try to go in the order of value from top to bottom. So either next week or in a future episode, we'll cover Coca-Cola, and we'll work our way down the list. Now, the positions may change, but we'll plan to cover all of the holdings that I currently have, which right now we sit at 43. And if that changes, if I add more, then we can cover those companies as well. So how do I do research on my companies? Well, let's start with Seeking Alpha. So Seeking Alpha is a great resource. You can learn a lot of things by just going to their site and typing in a ticker symbol. So let's go to Verizon, even though I'm already on their page. And this is the page that you'll typically see. So this is the summary page. You will get a lot of information just out of the summary page, kind of the 1-day view, right? So let's see how Verizon is reacting to the market. You can see it's mostly up for the day. But you can see trends over time, and you can see the results here. So obviously, this has a bunch of tabs, and you can see a lot of them. Some of them are locked down, so whether you're a paying subscriber or not to Seeking Alpha, I am not. So I wanted to walk you guys through what you can get as kind of a free member of Seeking Alpha and what information you can find out. But I like to start on the summary tab and just look through the general headlines and see if anything sticks out news-wise. And, you know, a lot around 5G and coronavirus, right? Those are kind of the two topics. I think coronavirus will be on everyone's stock page if you go into Seeking Alpha, but some things around Verizon. So Verizon is a telecommunications company. That might be another thing. Another place where you might start is Wikipedia, right? So if you go to Verizon's Wikipedia page, it walks you through the history of what the company is and what they do, and where they've been, and kind of significant things. So you can decide whether or not this is a sector that you're interested in or a company that you're interested in particular. So Verizon is an American telecommunications company, right? So servicing the phone market. So a lot of you are probably familiar with Verizon Wireless, which is just a particular division within Verizon. It's the second biggest wireless communications company in the United States. I believe AT&T is bigger. So that is what a lot of us are familiar with. But Verizon actually started out as a mid-Atlantic public service, public utility. So a lot of the telephone companies in the US were called Bell. So Bell Atlantic was how Verizon originally started, and through a series of mergers and acquisitions with other telecommunications company and digital companies, Verizon has become the entity that it is today. So again, you'll see industry here, telecommunications and mass media. It'll even give you links to their ticker symbol. You can see that Verizon is a part of the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 100, S&P 500. Kind of basic information here. It also gives you some revenue and income statements. You have to just check the year to see if these are up to date or not. But Wikipedia can actually give you a fair amount of information. So jumping back over to Seeking Alpha, there's a lot of information on the summary tab. You can check through some of the articles. So let's check on like this one, for example, let's check on this one. So installing 5G at Energy Department's national laboratories. So it talks about how 5G is being installed in a Washington location, and just kind of gives you general information. That's a pretty quick article, but it gives you just some insight into the things that are going on. Why I like Verizon is its dominance in the wireless market, right? So 5G is a trend that is going to kind of be the next step in evolution for the wireless mobile market. And I think Verizon is well positioned. They're kind of known as having the fastest network in 5G right now. However, the technology that they're using is different than some of the other telecoms in that it's not as widespread. So the issue with Verizon's 5G network is that it may not be accessible outside of those very particular hotspots where they are. And so the spread is not wide, even though it's super fast. So I think Verizon has the ability to overcome that. They've been well positioned in the past, and I think that'll continue in the future. So if we jump back to the overall page, the main tab that I'm looking at and am particularly, there's two really, right? So dividends is one of the areas where I am most interested because I'm, again, dealing with passive income stream, but then also key data. So key data will tell us more about the company. So let's dive into both of those tabs. So in the key data tab, there's the financials tab. So in the financials heading, and then income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. So income statement can be interesting to look at. Income statement will tell you their revenue, their expenses, and income, and just give you an overall idea of how they make money and how it's doing year over year, which is interesting, right? So kind of that's obviously an important tab. But then also cash flow will talk you through like literally their cash, right? So how they're what income comes in and what goes out. So cash flow can be important. And most of these established companies, they'll have pretty solid cash flow. So you typically aren't worrying about that too much in dividend companies, but you might want to check on it from time to time. The tab that I'm most interested in is the balance sheet, right? And determining, does Verizon have a good mix of assets compared to their liabilities? And so if you look at Their assets, it's broken up into kind of short-term assets, so mostly cash and accounts receivable and these current assets, and then their long-term assets, so things like property and merger, what they call goodwill, so kind of through these acquisitions, other intangibles, which are similar to this goodwill category, and then their liabilities, right? So things where they owe. So this is typically where you'll see all of the debt and income taxes, things like that, their current liabilities. So between their liabilities and their equity, so liabilities plus equity should equal their assets. So this number, so if you look at total, total assets of 291.7 billion. So these are in millions of dollars. So 291 billion. And then if you look at liabilities and equity, it adds up to 291.7 billion, right? So that essentially tells you how much their equity is worth, right? That's essentially how you get to make the formula balance. You look at their assets, you look at their liabilities, and then their outstanding stock or equity is made to add up to this total number so that the formula balances. But what I'm looking for in a balance sheet is typically a lot of assets and how much liability do they have. So Verizon is interesting because it's a utility, so they're always going to have a high amount of kind of hard assets, right? So this property, plant, and equipment is a high number, right? 288 billion. That's a big number. And then this depreciation value is the amount of depreciation that these hard assets have taken over time, right? So things decay, right? Like your plant is not as good as it was when it opened 10 years ago. And so depreciation takes into account how much you're losing on those hard assets. In the liability section, what I'm typically looking for is debt and how much debt do you have compared to your assets, which you'll see also in our dividends exploration. So why don't we jump over to dividends? So this is the dividends tab, and what you'll see, the dividend scorecard is a good way to just get a snapshot of what Verizon is doing. And I like to look at this dividend score. So their relative yield, compared to your peers in their industry, you can see that they're ranked at a 7. So they have a pretty good yield. So right now their yield is 4.5%. Which is pretty good for a utility. That's a little inflated because stock prices have been dropping significantly. But the next number you see is dividend consistency. So the company's, as it says, the company's track record for paying consistent dividends. Let's look at that really quickly. So dividend history header will show you how have they been paying out the dividends. It actually looks fairly consistent to me. So if you look at all, it looks like they've been paying their dividend at regular dates. They haven't drastically cut their dividend, right? So it hasn't gone down at all, even through the recession in 2007, 2008. That dividend stayed there and did not decrease. So that's the dividend history. If we jump back to the scorecard, there's a section called dividend safety, right? So the company's ability to keep paying this dividend is often based on like their payout ratios. So if you look, their payout ratio is right around 50%. The cash dividend payout ratio is 56%. And then again, as I mentioned, right, how much long-term debt do you have compared to your assets? So this long-term debt to asset ratio is actually pretty good for a utility that owns a lot of property and telephone lines and things like that, right? So that 33% is nothing that I am personally worried about. That might vary based off of the portfolio companies that you're looking at, right? You might want companies that have no debt, or you might want to have companies that have low debt. Typically in a dividend growth investment portfolio, you're not going to have companies that have super high debt because that is associated with like more growth companies, but it depends on the company, right? So some like real estate companies have super high debt because they own a ton of property or land or things like that. And it's usually pretty leveraged. This other value, and probably why their safety score is low, is this long-term debt to EBITDA, or like their profits basically. So if they had to, pay out all of their debt compared to their EBITDA, their current EBITDA, they wouldn't be able to do that. So they would have to sell some assets in order to pay off all of that long-term debt. Now, again, Verizon has a ton of assets, so that's why this particular ratio is low, while this one is high, right? So their income is not over every year, their income is not beating how much debt they have on their books. Additionally, you can see kind of the annual dividends per share, right? So this is what it looks like annually. About, if you had one share, you're getting $2.46, and then non-GAAP EPS. This is to account for accounting, but their overall payout ratio is, again, 49.8%. And then lastly, if we jump back to the dividend scorecard, one of the things that we're always interested in is growth, right? So how are they growing? And you can check on that here, right? So the 1-year rate is around 2%, 3-year rate 2.15, 5 years 2.5. And it shows you how many years they've been growing, right? So the dividend has been growing pretty significantly. It came down here in like the 2011 to 2012 year, and then went back up. So overall, the growth has been solid. Utilities typically have a low yield and a decent growth rate, but nothing too spectacular because they're stable. Utilities tend to be around for very long periods of time, right? A lot of these companies are hundreds of years old. And so you want something that is stable and not necessarily going to be the highest driver of growth, but something that it will be consistent. So that's what I'm looking for out of Verizon. I like this stock overall. It does a good job. I think it's well positioned in the telecom industry, particularly for 5G in the mobile space. I think some things that I would want to look into is the ratio of their mobile, like Verizon Wireless's operating income versus their non-wireless sections, and to see what that spread looks like. I think that's something that, I don't want to do in this video. We can probably do in a future video, because I want these to be more of an overview and just the things that I look for. But we can dive in deep on Verizon in another episode where I look at their specific divisions and see how each one is performing, and then decide whether or not, I should change my allocation in my current holdings. But overall, I like Verizon. I think it's a safe bet in the telecom industry, something that you can hold on to for a very long time without having to worry about. But that situation with wireless changes over time, and can change fairly quickly. So you always want to keep an eye on stocks that have a lot of competition. And Verizon, I think, in their wireless industry will face some competition from not necessarily the other big carriers, but some of these companies that are a little smaller or doing innovative things with pricing, particularly around wireless plans, and not having a post-paid carrier being their biggest competitors, but some of these prepaid carriers that leverage networks having innovative pricing ideas. So that's also something to look out for in the future. But overall, I would recommend Verizon Communications. Obviously, I have it in my portfolio. Hopefully this information was helpful to you guys. I want to keep doing this series. Let me know in the comments if you like this kind of information, and if it's helpful for you to make a decision on whether or not to purchase these stocks or include them in your portfolio. Also, let me know in the comments if you want more in-depth analysis or if this is the right level. And I look forward to all of those comments. Thanks again for listening, everybody, today. Give me a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks.